the moment I stepped into my own wedding. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Disgusting! How dare you show your face here?" Laughter died, glasses stilled, and every eye turned toward me. My name is Minerva Clarkson, and that was the day my father tried to turn love into shame. The doors swung wide, and before the first note of music could fill the air, his voice cut across the room, sharp and merciless. "Disgusting! How dare you show your face here?" I froze where I stood, the veil trembling against my lips, as though it too had heard the sentence passed on me. In that instant, the weight of every scar carved across my skin became a verdict handed down all over again. I am Minerva Clarkson, 34 years old. I have spent years in operating rooms and war zones. A trauma surgeon who once wore the uniform of an Army medical officer in Iraq. The fire that seared across my face and neck during a roadside bombing marked me forever. The kind of mark you cannot hide, even when you want to. My father, a powerful Virginia attorney with a reputation for winning cases and crushing opponents, never let me forget what those marks meant to him. My mother, timid and loyal to him in silence, rarely raised her voice to defend me. That silence carved its own wound. Now, standing in the aisle on the day I was supposed to begin a new life, every eye turned toward me. My bride, Emily, waited at the altar, steady, radiant. Her presence the only warmth in a hall that suddenly felt like a courtroom. Whispers slid between rows of polished pews. I could see them mouthing words, half hidden behind hands, their glances darting like knives. My chest tightened. The old shame surged back, quicker than breath, sharper than reason. My pulse pounded so loudly it drowned out the hush of the room. I tried to take one step, but my knees wavered. For a heartbeat, I wondered if love was enough to carry me forward, or if the echo of my father's contempt would finally break me on the very day I was meant to be whole. I nearly collapsed before I had even crossed the first few feet of the aisle. I grew up in a house where silence was sharper than words. A 2-story home in Virginia, with the flag out front and tension spread across the dining table like a second tablecloth. My father sat at the head, his voice carrying more weight than the walls could hold. He never asked what I wanted to be. He told me. Clarkson children were bred to practice law, to argue until the room bent in their favor. "We don't stitch wounds or patch bones," he would say. "We litigate. We win." My mother's gentleness never balanced him. She slipped me small notes, folded squares hidden under my pillow, words written in her careful hand. "You're enough." They were the only reminders that someone in that house saw me for who I was. But I couldn't stop myself from sneaking library books about anatomy and surgery, running my fingers over the drawings of muscles and veins as if they were maps out of his world. Each time he caught me, he laughed. "A girl with blood on her hands? You'd faint before you saved a soul." His voice branded me before any flame ever did. Even then the battle line was drawn. I dreamed of saving lives. He demanded control. Neither of us was willing to yield. I can still see the smoke curling on the television screen the morning the towers fell. My father called it tragedy. I called it a summons. When I told him I would serve in the Army Medical Corps, his eyes narrowed, his words colder than steel. "They'll chew you up and spit you out. You'll embarrass this family." I signed the papers anyway. Months later, in Iraq, a roadside bomb split the desert open. Flames swallowed a transport and turned night into a furnace. Training vanished. Instinct took over. I ran into fire, hands tearing at twisted metal, dragging one soldier, then another, out of the wreck. The second was a Navy SEAL, his eyes wild with terror, fixed on me as if I were the last anchor to life. That look burned deeper than the heat licking across my skin. When I woke in a military hospital, bandages stiff around my face and neck, I searched for my father's words. A card had come, 3 lines scrawled in his familiar hand. "Don't embarrass this family." It was then I understood. To him, the scars carved across me were not proof of survival, not honor earned in fire, but failure branded into flesh. I never knew then that the seal I pulled from that inferno would one day stand again before me, trembling, and turn those scars into something else entirely. Coming home was nothing like I imagined. The fight didn't end when I left Iraq. It lived in the mirror. The scars were etched deep across my face and neck, angry ridges that no amount of cream or bandages could erase. At the VA hospital, they stretched skin with relentless therapy, strapped me into a pressure mask that made every breath feel like labor, and taught me again how to swallow, how to sleep without choking on pain. Each morning when I faced the mirror, I no longer recognized the woman staring back. Half of her was familiar, the other half foreign, as if fire had rewritten her story without permission. When I finally sat down at the family dinner table, my father's eyes slid over me, then away. He muttered without even pausing his fork, "You walk funny." That was all. Nothing more. To his colleagues, I was invisible. He never once introduced me as a veteran or a survivor. In his world of polished shoes and courtroom victories, I simply did not exist. I tried to find work in civilian hospitals. Doors opened when they saw my resume, then closed the moment they saw my face. People called me inspirational, in tones laced with pity. Their smiles told me they didn't see a surgeon. They saw a scar. The cruelest cut came later. I discovered my father never mentioned my service, never told anyone I had worn a uniform. He had erased me from his story. I wasn't a daughter to be honored, only a blemish to be hidden. It was in that silence Emily appeared. She arrived at the Veterans Center with a stack of books and a smile that didn't falter when she saw me. She didn't ask about the scars. She asked what I liked to read. That question, simple as it was, opened something in me that no surgery ever could. Days became weeks, and she kept coming back. She laughed with me, sat with me when pain broke through, and looked at me as if the scars weren't the first thing in the room. With her, I felt whole, if only for a while. When I asked her to marry me, she didn't hesitate. Her yes was immediate, her eyes steady, her hand tight in mine. For the first time, I believed there was a future worth stepping into, but my father's shadow reached even there. When he learned of our wedding, he let out a short, cruel laugh. "Who would marry you looking like that? 2 embarrassments in one marriage?" He declared he wouldn't attend. But I knew better. Control was his oxygen. He would not resist an audience. The proof came when a cousin pulled me aside, voice hushed, warning, "Your father has something planned. Don't underestimate him." I understood then. This wedding wasn't just a vow of love. It would be a battlefield, and facing him there would be the fiercest fight of my life. The chapel glowed with stained glass light spilling across polished wood, white lilies breathing their sweetness into the air. I walked slowly, gown trailing behind me, veil trembling with every breath. At the altar, Emily stood waiting, her smile steady, her gaze locked on mine, carrying me forward when my knees wanted to fold. Then the crack of his voice sliced through the hush. "Disgusting! How dare you show your face here?" He rose from the front row like a judge rising to deliver a sentence. Forks froze mid-air. A glass slipped and clattered onto tile. Whispers slithered between rows. The silence afterward was louder than any shout. My body went rigid. My chest pounded so hard I thought ribs might split. In an instant, I was a child again, his mocking words spilling down the table, branding me as weak, unworthy. Around him, I caught heads nodding, lips curling in agreement. "Shame to the family," someone muttered, and heat surged through my throat. Emily stepped closer, fingers catching mine, her whisper threading into me. "We stand together." That single touch steadied me against the cliff's edge. But the officiant faltered, lowering his book. Guests leaned forward, their faces sharp with expectation, as if I were on trial before them all. In that moment, I felt stripped bare, not a bride, not a daughter, but an exhibit in a case my father had already decided. The day meant for love had twisted into the cruelest courtroom yet. I stood frozen, dragged toward the abyss, my father's scorn echoing louder than vows, louder than hope. Then came a sound that cut through the suffocating stillness, a chair scraping slowly against the floor. Heads turned. From the head table, a man rose, dressed in ceremonial whites, shoulders square like iron. He moved deliberately, as though gravity itself had to be wrestled into place. His eyes found me, fixed and unblinking, ignoring my father, ignoring the bride, as if the scars alone commanded his attention. His lips trembled before the words left them, thin but certain. "I know those scars." The chapel froze. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Recognition struck me like a bolt. Those eyes, panicked, wide in firelight, had once stared at me from the wreckage of a burning Humvee. He pressed a hand to his chest, voice breaking and reforming. "She carries them outside. I carry mine inside. She saved my life in Kandahar." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "She saved a SEAL?" The murmur spread like wildfire. Then he turned, arm rising to point straight at my father. "You dare call those scars shame? They are the reason I stand here alive, the reason my daughter still has a father." The hall erupted. Guests surged to their feet, applause spilling like thunder. A handful of veterans in the back snapped into salute, stiff and solemn. I looked at my father, face drained of color, jaw slack, his power stripped from him in a heartbeat. For once, he had no words. Emily's tears shone as she leaned close, whispering through her sobs, "Now they see you." And for the first time in years, I felt the truth settle deep inside. The scars I carried were not a sentence. They were proof of survival, of sacrifice, of life wrestled back from fire. The man in white stepped forward, each stride slow but unshaken, until he stood at the center of the aisle. His voice trembled at first, then steadied, filling every corner of the chapel. "I should be dead. Instead, I stand here because she walked through fire for me." The words cracked open the silence, and then he gave the room the memory I had carried alone. He described the night flames swallowed metal, the deafening roar of a blast that turned sand into shrapnel. He told them how I pulled him free, my gloves melting into steel and flesh, how my own skin caught the fire meant for him. He said he could still smell the burning fabric, could still hear his own screams before my arms dragged him out of death's reach. A hush fell so heavy it pressed against my ribs. I saw people blink hard, tears glinting. An older veteran near the back rose stiffly to attention, palm slicing the air in a salute. Others followed, silent but solemn. The officiant bowed his head, clutching the book to his chest as though the words were scripture. I looked at my father. His face had drained of color, his jaw working but no sound emerging. He was pinned there, like a defendant cornered by evidence undeniable. For the first time, his certainty cracked. For the first time, he could not speak. Something shifted inside me. My shoulders pulled back, my spine rose tall, and for once I no longer carried the weight of hiding. I breathed fully, as though the air itself had changed. Emily reached up, brushed tears from her cheeks, and whispered, "Now they know, but I always knew." Applause broke out, at first scattered, then swelling into thunder rolling beneath the vaulted ceiling. Guests stood, row after row, clapping, cheering, their faces transformed. The same lips that had muttered shame now whispered reverence. Glasses lifted high, heads bowed. The sound of crystal chiming rose like bells of absolution. I turned my gaze to my father. He sat hunched, smaller than I had ever seen him, swallowed by the crowd's roar. He could no longer command the room. The truth had stripped him bare. And for the first time in my life, I didn't lower my eyes. That moment, born of scars, fire, and survival, tore the day from disgrace and reshaped it into triumph. My wedding had been stolen and returned in the same breath, transformed from my father's courtroom into a sanctuary of honor, courage, and love. The reception buzzed with voices still shaken by what had unfolded in the chapel. I stood in a corner for a breath, the bouquet trembling faintly in my hand. When he approached me again, the Navy SEAL's face looked older now than the memory burned into me, lines etched by years of carrying something heavy. He reached into his jacket and pressed a worn photograph into my palm. The edges were curled, the color fading, but the image was sharp enough to split me open. I saw myself younger, my face wrapped in gauze, uniform caked in dirt and blood. Beside me, his arm draped across my shoulder, both of us alive against all odds, captured only hours after the blast. He touched the picture with a reverence that made my throat tighten. "I kept this all these years," he said, his voice unsteady but resolute. "Proof that you saved me." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My fingers closed around the photograph, as if it might burn away if I let go. Around us, people gathered, one by one, extending their hands, eyes no longer filled with pity but with respect. An older man in a pressed suit said quietly, "Not shame, honor." Another guest nodded, echoing, "Honor." The word spread like a benediction. Strangers clasped my hand firmly, some with tears in their eyes, others bowing their heads slightly, as though I had earned a place beyond what titles or gowns could give. I felt Emily's hand slip into mine, her smile trembling with pride. For the first time since I returned from war, I was not a wound to be hidden. I was seen, whole and unbroken, not because of the scars, but because of what they meant. The applause from the ceremony had been thunder, but this was different. This was quiet reverence, the kind that lingers, the kind that heals. Later that night, after the music softened and the laughter of guests faded down the hall, I found myself walking into my father's study. The door creaked as I pushed it open. He sat in his leather chair, shadows curling around him, a half-empty glass of whiskey resting heavy in his hand. The yellow lamp above his desk cast his face in a weary, unfamiliar light. For a long time, he said nothing. His eyes shifted from the glass to the floor, then to me, before dropping again. The silence stretched so taut it could have broken. Finally, his voice rasped, rougher than I had ever heard. "I was wrong." The words fell heavy, awkward, unpolished, but real. He swallowed hard and continued. "I thought if I kept you hard, if I broke you down, you'd rise stronger. I believed ridicule was the only medicine that worked. I told myself it would forge you, but all it did was make me smaller, weaker. I see that now." I stood still, letting the weight of his confession settle. My pulse was steady, not racing with anger this time, but beating with clarity. I answered evenly, my voice clear. "I never needed pity. I needed respect." His eyes flickered up, rimmed red. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and set the glass down with trembling fingers. The silence between us wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the faintest crack in a wall that had stood my entire life. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something I never thought I would see. The first fracture in his armor, and the first time he looked at me not as a burden, not as shame, but as someone who had survived fire and refused to fall. A year later, Emily and I returned to the chapel, this time without flowers, music, or a crowd. The pews stood empty, the air hushed, and the only sound was the faint echo of our footsteps on the polished floor. Light streamed through the stained glass windows, soft and fractured, spilling across my face. I felt its warmth land directly on the scars that once made me hide. I lifted a hand and traced the familiar ridges, no longer flinching at the touch. My voice broke the silence in a whisper, meant for no one but myself. Not shame, but proof. Proof of the fire I walked through. Proof of the life I refused to surrender. Proof that what nearly destroyed me had instead remade me. Emily reached for my hand, her fingers threading through mine with the same certainty she had shown on the day everything almost collapsed. She smiled, her eyes bright, carrying no pity, only pride. In that stillness, I understood. Whether my father changed or not no longer defined me. The truth had already been spoken aloud, witnessed, and sealed. I had learned to carry myself without apology. Scars are not disgrace. They are history written in flesh, of survival, of love, of sacrifice. and they will never again be hidden.